Howdy, guys. So this is going to be the abridged lecture where we're going to go through chapter 5, which is digestion. So effectively, how do we get these calories in? First and foremost, it starts in your mouth. You not only chew your food, which is going to make it smaller and easier to break down, this is also where you're going to go ahead and create saliva, which is going to have both amylases and lipases, which are going to break down both carbohydrates and fats. Amylase is going to be specific for carbs. Protease is going to be specific, for proteins, and lipases are going to be specific to lipids, aka fat. So we're going to talk about the physiology of the system, the chemistry of the system, how we're going to break down the individual molecules of each of the macronutrients, and then how we're going to go ahead and deliver them around the body. So we are going to have a whole lot of segments. We start in the mouth, we go down the esophagus into the stomach. We do share the air hole and the wonderful food hole for a little bit, which is a bit of a design flaw of the human body, but we guess we got to deal with it. And then we go into the stomach where we're going to go ahead and have our food being broken down by hydrochloric acid, aka stomach acid, which is going to break things down into more of their component parts, along with this is where we're going to really start with our protein digestion through pepsin. And then we're going to move on to the small intestine where we're going to have all of the different constituents coming from the pancreas and the liver, which is going to really help us break everything down enzymatically, taking it up into the small intestine with our duodenum, followed by our jejunum, and then finally our ileum. Then we're going to get ourselves into the large intestine where we're going to be resorbing mostly water and a couple vitamins and maybe some leftover nutrients we haven't touched. And then we're going to evacuate it into hopefully a toilet. And so we are going to be regulating this through a number of different negative feedback systems, as you would probably think. We're going to have digestion for each of obviously different macronutrients. It's going to be digested slightly different due to different enzymes and different effects that are going to occur through different pH situations. The stomach itself, once it realizes that there happens to be a lot in it, is going to help you empty. But otherwise, if there's a lot of fat, carbs, protein, energy, osmolarity, or big particles, we are going to keep that pyloric sphincter closed and not allow that food to go into the duodenum. Now, all of these different hormones are going to be important with the regulation of digestion, making sure that we're producing what we need to in those areas so that we're going to be able to digest our food thoroughly and take all the nutrients out of them that we effectively can. When in doubt, guys, if you have questions over whether or not you digested something, look in the toilet. If you see it a second time, you didn't digest it. Hence why you sometimes see corn a second time, because you don't break down that fiber. And pennies. But why you've eaten and swallowed pennies, I don't understand. Now, all of these different enzymes are going to be specific to breaking down, once again, those different macronutrients. You do not need to worry about memorizing all of these, but understand the basic differences between the families and the areas that these are going to be released in. Now, this is, once again, looking into our colon where we have our ascending, transverse, descending, and then our sigmoidal, and then we're, once again, having our removal of it, and this is where we're going to be retaining most of our fluids. Thanks to osmolarities, if we happen to eat something that has a higher osmolarity than our own body, we don't do a good job of pulling the water out of it. However, we will pull a certain amount of the sodium and otherwise out. And what this means is if we go with food that happens to be really high osmolarity or fluid when we're trying to rehydrate, it's actually going to slow down the digestion. Now, when it comes to absorption, you just need to familiarize yourself with how we're going to be breaking down our carbs into simple sugars, fats into individual micelles, which are going to be brought in thanks to being brought into those smaller components through lipases and bile salts. And then our proteins are going to be broken down into the individual amino acids. Water is just going to be absorbed through diffusion. And then our minerals are going to also use very specific transporters, which are sometimes competed for. And so that's going to be important when we get into minerals. Now, when it comes to carbs, we're getting a number of them, not just always in the simple carbohydrates. Sometimes they're disaccharides, like you can see in the bottom left. Sometimes they're tri or polysaccharides, like you see in the upper left and center, where it's going to have to be cleaved multiple times into those individual sugar units. And what we're going to find is that the simple sugar units, meaning glucose, galactose, and fructose, are going to use specific receptors that are going to allow it to go in. So we talked about GLUT4 on muscle. Well, we've got GLUT5 for fructose, GLUT2 for glucose and galactose, and along with fructose, which is going to allow it to get into our circulatory system. And notice the glucose galactose, SGLT, is using sodium as a symporter, which means sodium is actually going to help with the absorption of glucose, hence why you see that added not just as an electrolyte, but also to help with the uptake of carbohydrates in things like Gatorade. Now, when it comes to protein digestion, the same basic thing is set where we have these long polypeptide chains that are going to be broken down into their individual amino acids thanks to the use of different enzymes that are going to break it down initially into di and tripeptides along with other individual amino acid specific enzymes that are going to break it down into their individuals. And notice also sodium is important here. So fats, thanks to that emulsification, that's where you're going to see them in the individual little micelles, and that's what's going to go ahead and be absorbed directly through the cellular membrane, and then they're going to be shipped off to the liver to be further modified after they're brought into what's known as a chylomicron, which is just a big ball of fat with a little bit of protein on the outside so that the body can tell what's effectively being shipped around. So here is the basics of how different vitamins are going to be absorbed and the different areas. The one that is the most fascinating as far as things that can go potentially a little bit wrong, which is going to notice B12, where you need that intrinsic factor, which is going to be created by parietal cells inside of the stomach. And so it's going to be brought in there, along with we're going to see some of our other vitamins might even be potentially absorbed in our colon, but for the most part, it's going to be in the ileum or the jejunum. And then remember, we've got a whole lot of bacteria in us. This is a good thing because it turns out they're going to be fermenting different things. They're going to give us things like vitamin K, and they're also going to be important with our overall immune system. But we're going to talk about the microbiome more at the end of the semester. So what we can have is some issues, obviously, with GI distress before and after exercise. We can have physiological issues due to a lack of blood flow to the area. We can have mechanical just due to the jostling where things are going to be bounced around. And then we have nutritional, which is we're taking too much of one macronutrient or another, with the body's not going to be able to well take it down. So what can we do about it? Well, plan. Don't eat a giant meal right before you exercise. Make sure we're not doing things with huge amounts of fiber, fructose, volume of food, and preparing ourselves appropriately so we're not going to cramp up when we're exercising, and we're not going to be uncomfortable, and we're going to be able to perform on a high level. So that is the basics of digestion. That was super fast. Sit down with your text, go through the chapter homeworks, really think your way through it. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great day.